Yo, what is up? TrevorTTG here with an Explorer slash Pioneer set review for Brothers War. I'm going to go through each of the cards I think is potentially relevant for each of the colours. There'll be chapters for each of the colours as well, and there'll be a link in the description to the full card image gallery. You might find that my definition of playable or potentially playable is a little more liberal than other people's. But hey, here we go. Let's go into it. So, starting with the white cards, Calamity's Wake. 2-mana instant, exile all graveyards. Players can't cast non-creature spells this turn. Exile Calamity's Wake. You have two effects which are quite powerful. The first one, obviously, exiling graveyards, does obviously do your own. And also, because it says all graveyards, it does not target, so it gets around something like the Ice Entity, that kind of effect. And players can't cast non-creature spells is another thing that you might want for different reasons, whether that's to bait a Wrath, where it's used as a kind of silence effect to kind of go off with your combo. Hey, there are two ends to this card. You can bring them in even different matchups. It's a bit flexible in that direction, and yeah, there you go. That's the potential here. Next up, probably one of the most hyped cards into the set, Lay Down Arms. One white, white for a sorcery. Exile target creature, mana value less than or equal to the number of planes you control. Its controller gains 3 life. Will be good in standard. Obviously, it's not good enough for modern. You have better removal spells, but in Pioneer and Explorer, you're playing in like blue-white control. You're playing cards like Irrigated Farmland. The removal you have early in the game is a little weaker. You have like Portable Hole. That's kind of it. Early removal, like maybe you march, but you're exiling cards, etc. Lay Down Arms pretty good, and the 3 life pretty negligible. So hey. Next up, we have Loran of the Third Path. 3 mana 2/1 Human Artificer, legendary, Vigilance, and when it enters the battlefield, destroy up to 1 target artifact or enchantment. This is predominantly a Reclamation Sage, with a human creature type, but then also has some additional upside. I mean, it's a 2/1 with Vigilance, it attacks, and you can get some value off of the abilities that you and your opponent draw. In Pioneer, you also access the cards like Spirit of the Labyrinth. You could maybe do some fun stuff with that, but hey, predominantly, hey, it's a Reclamation Sage with a human, which is super relevant. Next up, Loran's Escape. And it's just a protection spell that gives hexproof and indestructible. And describes 1. There are some places where you want the hexproof, obviously versus rats. A lot of the cards that give you protection, like God's Willing, don't give you the indestructible to save you out of that. And so, best of both worlds, and lets you scry as well. Nice. Meticulous Excavation is a bit of a weird one. So, 1 mana for enchantment, 2 and a white, exiled. Return target permanent you control to its hand. If it has Unearth instead of exile, then return that card to its hand. It's that funny wording because for Unearth cards, if they leave the battlefield, if they're not exiled, basically they get exiled. And so if you didn't exile, it would go get exiled when you return it to your hand. But anyway, the reason I put this here is because it potentially enables some weird combos where you're reducing activated abilities and kind of like recasting things. I don't know exactly, but there's a potential there, and so it's made the list. Next up, this is a bit of a far-fetched, well, not far-fetched, but a little bit of a stretch here. That's Myrel, Shield of Argive. 4 mana 3/4. During your turn, your opponents can't cast spells, activate abilities, but that's creatures or enchantments. And then whenever she attacks, create X 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature tokens, where X is the number of soldiers you control. So, for most of these like wet aggro decks, you're either kind of relying on killing them early, or you're playing company. You don't generally want to be tapping out for a 4 mana creature. Even if it's stopping your opponent casting spells on your turn or whatever, generally at that point in the game you're starting to be afraid of things like Wrath effects, and so I'm more worried about that rather than commit another creature to the board. What's the wording? Like no Obliterator, Haters, Persecutor, Slow, Hero Blade Hold. I don't think so. You gotta think like, would Hero Blade Hold be good? And the answer is maybe yes. And so I think it might be just good enough. It's not Hero Blade Hold. It doesn't build an army by itself. It requires soldiers to trigger its deliverability. But hey, maybe there's enough value in the first ability to get it over the top. Next up, Recommission. And again, like, not super, like, innocuous or powerful, but, like, return target artifact to creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. And if it's a creature, it gets a good extra counter. Which is nice, but generally, I'm just looking at ways to reanimate artifacts, and like, this is a nice one. We have a few different reanimation effects for creatures in standard. Obviously, Count Stay Away is the number 1. But yeah, that's quite interesting, and being able to reanimate artifacts might be super useful. Next up, Recruitment Officer. And look, we need elite vanguards. Recruitment Officer is another kind of elite vanguard, 1 mana 2/1. puts the beat down on, but it also has this other ability to kind of grab your cards, like a Militia Bugle style effect. Which gives you a nice, like, again, I talked before about morale. You don't want to necessarily commit more to the board on turn 4 once you have a bunch of creatures in play and you're beating them down. You're going to like Red Hull into a counter spell, or you're going to run into a board wipe. And so this kind of ability gives you something to do with your mana that still kind of like gives you something to, well, yeah, gives you something to do to allow you to rebuild as well, which is super nice. Repair and Recharge. Okay, so this is the first card that has Prayer Power Stone on it. There are a few of these, and it depends what you're doing with the Power Stones. But the main ability, 5 mana, return an artifact, enchantment, or planeswalker, notably, from your graveyard to the battlefield. It's a reanimation effect with a Power Stone ability as well. It's pretty flexible, it can hit a few different things, and so, hey. And there are some artifacts you might want to bring back from the graveyard. We do have access to Refurbish, but this is a little bit more flexible, being able to hit all 3 types. And yeah, you get a Power Stone, maybe you can do something with it. Next we have Siege Veteran. There's a lot of human cards in the set, kind of human, like nice accessories to the human deck. 3 mana 2/2 has the kind of like Luminarch Aspirate ability where you put a count on a creature you control at the beginning of combat. But then also, whenever a non-token creature you control dies, create a 1/1 colorless soldier token, artifact creature token. And what this does is it allows you to commit to the board while like protecting yourself from a wrath. You commit to the board, you have immediate impact with a counter, and then also when they wrath you, you get a bunch of tokens, or well, some tokens. Doesn't count itself, worth bearing in mind, but is a nice one. Is pretty nice. Next up, another pretty talked about card is Soul Petition. 1 and a white for an instant, exile target non-land permanent. For as long as that card remains exiled, its owner can play it by spending 2 more mana. Has that kind of like delay style ability. It's at its best where you're not allowing your opponent to cast the card. And by that I really mean killing them. But if you're playing like a control deck and can just like, okay, I'll wait till later after I've drawn some cards, and then I'll be able to counter it again, that also kind of fills the bill. So Soul Petition, pretty good and pretty hyped. And then next we've got Urza's Silex. So 3 mana artifact, 2 white, exile it, tap and exile it. Each player chooses 6 lands they control, destroy all other permanents. Activate only as a sorcery. It's that kind of Oblivion Stone type effect. Obviously in Pioneer we also have Perilous Vault, which is colorless activate, but is a bit more expensive. Notably, Urza's Silex is another ability where if you pay 2 more mana when it's put into exile, you can search your library for a Planeswalker card and put it into your hand. Pretty solid, and might make a splash. Last white card is Yoshin Frontliner. Now, 1 mana soldier, which is relevant. When it attacks another target creature you control gets +1/+1 to end a turn. So, well, once it's attacking, it buffs your creatures, but then in an Earth ability, to come back from the graveyard, can be pretty relevant. It gets to come back, attack, yada yada. Notably, cheap on Earth attacks can be super powerful. There are cards floating around, like Prized Amalgam, which obviously, at the moment, the versions of Dredge that kind of do exist, both in Pioneer and Explorer, aren't playing white, but it's like it's a really cheap way to trigger the effect, and yeah, worth considering. And there's a few other cards I'll go into as well. Okay, so then blue cards, we're starting off with Curate. 1 blue instant, surveil 2, draw a card. So there are a few different cards that are quote-unquote surveil matters. We do have a 1 blue-black hybrid sorcery speed surveil 2, draw a card, which is a bit worse, but does have initial cards stapled onto it. There's potential for a surveil deck to kind of exist, and this is a little bit closer to playable. So, hey, thought I'd give that a shout out. Next up, Defabricate. Now, 1 blue, instant speed, obviously, counter target, artifact or enchantment spell. Spells count this way, exile it instead of putting it into the graveyard, and then also you can counter target artifact or triggered ability. We have access to something like a Null as a sideboard card already if you want to play this kind of effect. It doesn't exile, which can be relevant, but then also the ability to counter activate triggered abilities is itself quite powerful and gives you some versatility as well. And so I thought this was something that could make it across. We're not stifling any Fable passages. Anyway, next up we've got Drafner, founder of Latnam. 1 blue, legendary creature, human artificer advisor. 1 in a blue, return an artifact you control to its owner's hand. 3 tap, copy target artifact spell that you control. So, okay, there's a lot going on here. It's a cheap artifact, it's a cheap legendary creature for something like Mox Amber. which also synergizes really, really well with the ability to return artifact you control to his hand. Those two cards together, say blue, return it as many times as you have blue mana, and that itself can trigger a bunch of abilities or do other things. The ability to copy artifact spells you control is also really, really strong, and so I think Drafter could definitely make a splash. There are a bunch of other things you can do with the return ability as well, abusing enter the battlefield effects, that kind of thing. But yeah, Philagi, Archaeologist, one blue human scout. Now, you can see this a bit, but enter the battlefield, military cards. You can put a non-creature, non-land card from among them into your hand. If you don't, it gets a counter and becomes a 1/4. So I would compare this to something like Augur of Bolas, but it also finds enchantments, artifacts, planeswalkers, and so it's pretty interesting. It's maybe the best Augur of Bolas like equivalent we found. Again, milling can be very, very useful, and so yeah, pretty cool, pretty cool. Next up, Flow of Knowledge. 4 and a blue, draw a card for each island you control, then discard 2 cards. Now we have access to some pretty good card draw spells. In the format. The Fatale one, which I can't remember its name of, Glimmer of Genius, and then obviously like Memory Deluge, which is the one that sees probably the most play. That's the closest comparison, where you're looking at 4 and then picking 2 to keep, and put the rest on the bottom. Here you discard the cards instead, and obviously you need to be playing a bunch of islands, which, again, with like the irrigated farmlands, or like Fetid Pool's mana base in blue-white or blue-black, you end up playing quite a lot of islands, but then also there's potential for something like mono-blue, and really, 5 mana instant speed, you're looking like 4 islands is really what you want. Obviously, any more than that's bonus, and obviously if you cast it on like turns like 10 when you have a bunch of islands in play, then you're drawing a bunch of cards. Pretty cool, and definitely worth noting. Next up, Forging the Anchor. Look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal any number of artifact cards from among them and put the revealed cards into your hand. The rest go on the bottom in any order. In a random order. It's just lead the stampede for artifacts. I think it's pretty good. Next up, Hercule, Master Wizard. 1 blue for a 2/4. Now, Hercule has a lot of text. Human Wizard Advisor has those creature types. At the beginning of your end step, if you've cast a non-creature spell this turn, reveal the top 5 cards of your library. For each card type among non-creature spells that you cast this turn, you may put a card of that type from among the revealed cards into your hand. Put the rest of the bottom of the library in any in a random order. Well, I think almost all the new cards are actually template at random, because of Arena Shuffler, but it's actually more annoying in paper for that. Yeah, so for example, if you cast a non-creature artifact, a non-creature enchantment, and it's in a sorcery, at the end of the turn, you look at the top 5, and you can pick one of each of those. Same goes for Planeswalker, and you can draw a bunch of cards off it. A 3 mana 2/4 is actually not the easiest to kill if you don't have a straight up removal spell. And yeah, like it's not getting like lightning struck off the board or whatever. Hercule, pretty neat. Machine over Matter. Okay. 1 in a blue, spell cost 1 less for if you control an artifact creature. Return target non-land permanent is on his hand. Yeah, it's a bounce spell. Hits non-land permanent, so obviously you can bounce like planeswalkers and things like that. The cost reduction is where it's at its best, obviously. Either if you're doing powerful artifact creature things in an aggressive way, it's a nice way to get something out of the way. But also you could use it to bounce your own things, to save them, to reuse things. And yeah, it's alright, isn't it? 1 with the Multiverse. 6 blue enchantment. You can look at the top card of your library anytime. You can play lands and cast spells from the top of your library. It's got that kind of like Future Sight style effect. Then once during each of your turns, you can cast a spell from your hand or the top of your library without paying its mana cost. So once per turn, you can like Omniscience, effectively. Super powerful, is way more castable than Omniscience. 4 mana is a lot less than 10. Sorry, 8 mana is a lot less than 10. Not 4. Side. Which also makes it more easy to kind of cheat. There are ways to cheat into play. There are cost reduction things you can do. And so maybe it makes it over. But yeah. Generally, like you're casting 2 spells to win with Omniscience. This lets you guess 1 of them for free. Next up, Sky Strike Officer. Another human card. 2 in a blue for a 2/3 with flying. And when it attacks, create a 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature token. The creature token itself is not attacking. And then it has tap 3 untap soldiers you control, draw a card. Flying human, decent. See all the humans matter cards. make soldiers, and then the draw ability seems fine. It's not the 3-drop slot is very, very cluttered, is the one concern, and so maybe it doesn't make it over in itself pretty powerful. I don't see you using the 3 untapped soldiers you control very much, unless you're playing a matchup where you kind of just get stored up on the ground. But in that case, it is pretty good. Yeah, seems okay. Seems okay. Next up, splitting the Power Stone. 2 and a blue as additional cost to sacrifice a spell, sacrifice an artifact. Create 2 tapped Power Stone tokens, and then if the sacrificed artifact was legendary, draw a card. There are some legendary artifacts that you can sacrifice. Maybe something like the Reality Chip. There's like Hope of Girapa, some other things lying around. But hey, if you want to make a bunch of Power Stones to then do some big powerful artifact spell thing, this is a good way to do it. And also some artifacts like being sacrificed and put in the graveyard to draw cards or whatever. Or deal damage, as it happens. Stern Lesson, kind of a similar one. Just instant speed, draw 2, discard 1, but then you also get a tap Power Stone token. Again, if you're doing Power Stone tokeny things, especially like a control shell, there are a couple of different blue instants that make them, and so worth noting. Urza, Power Stone Prodigy. 3 mana for a 1/3, Vigilance. It's expensive. You have the loot ability to draw and discard, but then whenever you discard 1 or more artifact cards, create a tapped Power Stone token. Triggers once a turn, which is fair, but obviously those abilities are separate. If you discard them to any other outlets, anything you have in play already, and there are a few different good ways to discard artifact cards, especially if you're looking to reanimate them, do things like that, or bring them out for your graveyard in some fashion. Seems decent. It's a little slow, but I think I could make it over. Urza's Command, first command. The one I don't think is good enough, but hey. Choose 2 creatures you don't control get -2 stones at a turn. Create a tap Power Stone token. Create a construct, construct artifact token with creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control, and then the last ability is scroll and draw a card. Obviously, the draws always going to be good. There are positions where you want to kind of like fade, or not fade, but kind of like try and like fog your opponent, delay them a little bit from killing you, but you get to do that while either developing your board with like a construct, making it a Power Stone token. Bear in mind you can do those both at the same time, make a bigger token, etc. And yeah, it's another instant way to make Power Stones if you want to do pseudo blue like artifact ramp, that kind of thing. Potential. Okay, so Urza's Rebuff's a weird one. It's a cancel. Yeah, sure, there are a lot of 3-mana counter spells. It has the versatility to tap 2 target creatures, which can be really, really strong. I don't know, but hey, it's there. The thing that exists and might be of use. Weak Stone Subjugation is really a card that I put in here for like mono blue decks where you don't have great removal. Enchant artifact or creature. When it enters the battlefield, you can pay 3 if you do tap Enchanted Permanent, but then Enchanted Permanent doesn't untap during its controls on tap step. Obviously, if they've attacked with a creature, you can then put it on there and it doesn't untap. There are a few other similar effects. There is not a lack, but there's not great blue removal. You have like Witness Protection, and so I think this could come up and get played. Arcane Proxy, 7 mana, 4/3. When it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, exile target instant or sorcery card with mana value less than or equal to its power from your graveyard, and you copy it and cast the copy without paying its mana cost. Has that kind of gear hockey effect, but it prototypes for 1 blue as a 2/1, and then you can cast a CMC 2 or less, and that's kind of where the power lies. It's a wizard as well, which is a relevant creature type. Obviously, there's some wizards meta cards. Card has a lot of potential. Could be really, really, really good. Okay, Combat Courier. I did see a tweet yesterday or the day before, someone saying this card will be banned by the end of next year. I don't necessarily believe that, but again, a cheap and artifact. Blue is actually a very important color for these kind of dredge decks. Playing things like Narcomoeba, Prized Amalgam. And yeah, you have the ability to draw a card as well, which is quite powerful. It's an artifact, so it triggers artifact meta cards with that kind of stuff as well. Here it is. Into black cards. So Ashnod, Flesh Mechanist. Black for a 1/1. Human Artificer is legendary with Death Touch. Typhoid Rats, lol. Whenever Ashnod Flesh Mechanist attacks, you be sacrificed another creature. If you do make a Power Stone, so it gives you a way to make Power Stones in black. And a way to do it pretty early as well, from like turn 2. The other ability, 5 exile a creature card from your graveyard to make a 3/3 colorless zombie. Is neat, but you'd really be playing it for the first thing, if you're trying to do Power Stony things in black early. Okay, right, yeah. So hype cards of the set. Diabolic Intent is a pretty nuts reprint. It's very, very hyped. We'll see exactly how much it does. I've seen like Grease Fangless with this. I've been playing Black Green Citadel myself. It does a lot in that deck. And there's a bunch of possibilities. We'll see how it actually plays out. I believe it's actually releasing on Modo a little earlier than the rest of the set, and so we'll see a little early to see how it splashes around. But yeah, pretty nuts reprint. Card's great. We'll see exactly what it does. Dreams of Steel and Oil. Hand disruption spell. A bit like a Despise. Target opponent reveals their hand. They choose an artifact or creature card from it. I said Despise. That's a creature or planeswalker. But then you get to choose a artifact or creature card from their graveyard, and then you exile all of the chosen cards. So it's not necessarily the best as your first hand disruption spell, but there are lots of decks in the format where you're boarding up to like eight hand disruption spells after with like Thoughtseize, and it's a really good second one because you get to exile from the graveyard as well. Next up, Fateful Handoff. Draw cards equals the mana value of target artifact or creature control. An opponent gains control of that permanent. This is solely on the basis that you can maybe donate it. Like, hey, you can use it as a 4-mana draw 4 maybe. Or 4-mana draw however many, but really, I've got this here because it lets you donate something. It doesn't let you donate Demonic Pact as artifact or creature, but maybe there's something else that you can kill your opponent with. Gix, Yawgmoth Praetor. 1 black, legendary creature, Phyrexian Praetor, 3/3. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, its controller may pay a life. If they do, they draw a card. So obviously that wording is like got the commander stuff on it if they want it. But really I'd be looking at this in something like a mono black aggro deck. Whether you be siphoning people or just like there's a lot of good mono black 1-drops, but the deck tends to kind of peter out late game, and this gives you a way to keep drawing cards, which is pretty good. In those decks you're not necessarily looking to activate the ability, but maybe there's a way somewhere where you do end up using it if you get flooded or something. But 4 black, discard X cards, X the top X cards of your opponent's library, and you can play lands and cast spells from among them without paying out mana costs, which is pretty good if you're ready to activate it. And maybe it sees playing something kind of mid-range shell as well, where the ability is more relevant. But hey, at the point where you've got 7 mana in play, unless you're ramping towards it, it might be pretty tough. Next up, Gix's Command. This is kind of a bit of a hedge. The modes themselves aren't particularly powerful. The 2+1 counters on a creature against lifelink. Destroy each creature with power 2 or less is kind of what I'm kind of relying on this card doing for it to be reasonable in Explorer and Pioneer. That's just, like, there are better sweepers, but it's the ability to have a sweeper that also does some other stuff. So you can rebuy a couple of creatures from your graveyard and then also have your opponent sacrifice a creature with the highest power among creatures they control, and maybe that clears up everything. Maybe you get to do a bit of both worlds. It might be good enough. Next up, I mentioned Typhoid Rats earlier. Gnawing Vermin. When Gnawing Vermin enters the battlefield, target player mills 2 cards. Yeah, whether you mill yourself or your opponent. There are some rats meta cards, but when it dies, target creature control gets -1 on turn. It trades up most of the time if you're trading with creatures. The ability to mill yourself is actually quite good, and everyone loves rats, right? Rats with the rats. Go for the Throat. Maybe the best card in the set, honestly. At the moment, there aren't very many like artifact decks. I don't mean like Greasefang. Obviously, you can use this to kill the Greasefang itself before they get to like bring the creature back in crew, the vehicle back in crew. But yeah, if there isn't like a really dominant artifact deck, this becomes the best removal spell in the format. Just full stop, I think. Like answering a turn 3 Greasefang when you're on the draw is really, really tough. This solves a lot of the problems that decks have with clunky removal, and yeah, go for the Throat is sick. Hostile Negotiations. 3 in a black, instant. Exile the top 3 cards of your library in a face down pile, and then the next top 3 cards in a face down pile. Pick a pile to choose face up, to turn face up, and then the opponent chooses one of those piles to put into your hand, and the other goes to your graveyard. You lose 3 life. So you get to look at effect 2 sets of 3 cards. The cards go into your graveyard, so the bottom of the library. And then yeah, you're losing 3, but you're getting like a little kind of fact fiction effect. You have some kind of agency in what you show, what you don't show. Obviously, if they pick the face down pile to add to your hand, then you don't get to see them. But hey, it's a nice option for black decks. Maybe it gets played in blue-black, but you have things like Memory Deluge. But in like black decks where you want some kind of advantage, it seems pretty good. I do love a fact fiction style effect. Misery Shadow. 1 in a black, 2/2 shade. If a creature an opponent controls will die exile instead, and then it has the Nantuko Shade ability for colorless. It might. So there are decks where exiling creatures when they die is relevant. Not tons of them at the moment, actually. But hey, there's enough where this could get played. Card's got some potential. Could get played. there's not, maybe it doesn't, maybe you want specific Kate cards instead for the graveyard decks, or like putting things in the graveyard, but if there's anything trying to like kind of like fuck up the board with like durable creatures that come back, or do things when they die, it's a powerful tool, and then yeah, you can pump it for a bunch. Okay, another bit of a weird one, a Thran Vigil, 1 in a black enchantment, whenever one or more artifacts and or creature cards leave your graveyard during this turn, you can put a counter on a creature you control. This is basically here because I think there's some potential for combos, doing some kind of weird combo shenanigans with it. Okay, Ashnod's Harvester. This is one of the actual cards I think will be really, really good in something like Dredge. Again, you've got like Prized Amalgam, a few other things. You want to mill yourself and then bring back creatures to bring back your creatures. Attacks the 3/1 out of the graveyard, which is pretty great, but then you also have the Exile ability, which is pretty great utility, as you don't have tons of interaction generally in that kind of deck. Yeah, I think it's a nice addition, nice little tool to have the pile. Okay, and then Transmogriant's Crown. They have a quote-unquote fixed Skull Clamp. 2 mana artifact equipment. Equip creature gets +2/+0, but then when it dies, you draw a card, and then you can equip it for single black. And I thought it would be worth pointing this card out, or at least kind of like showcasing it, because I think there are some decks that can maybe take advantage of this, and do some shenanigans. Obviously, it's going to be great in something like Commander, but that's not the focus here. If you exactly you're making a bunch of tokens, this lets you draw a bunch of cards. Into red, we have Arms Race. 4 mana, enchantment, and then 3 in a red, you can put an artifact card from your hand onto the battlefield, that artifact gains haste, and then it gets sacrificed. Sneak attack for artifacts, but for 4 mana. To activate, I should say. Potentially quite powerful. There are artifacts with a bunch of advantage to the battlefield abilities, we'll see some of them a bit later. Is pretty good. And yeah. Pretty cool. Bitter Reunion. 1 in a red enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you may discard a card. Then if you do, draw 2 cards. Kind of like Tormenting Voice, it doesn't happen as a cast trigger as well. Makes it less punishing to get countered. But then when it's in play, you can pay 1 and sacrifice it to give creatures you control haste, which is powerful if you're doing kind of reanimation shenanigans, that kind of thing. And yeah. More red cards. Brotherhood's End. 1 red, choose 1, either. 3 damage to each creature in play with Walker. Okay, yep, I'm in. Or destroy all artifacts with mana value 3 or less. 2 good modes. I think it'd be a solid sideboard. Hornstone Seeker. 2 mana 2/2 with Menace. So, like, decent stats. Menace is obviously pretty good. It's a lizard, not a relevant creature type, but it does enter the battlefield and create a Power Stone. It's a cheap Power Stone maker, but then when it leaves the battlefield, you sacrifice it. If you have a way to stick it around, if you're trying to do, like, I don't know, it's a powerful turn 2 play, potentially. Mechanized Warfare. 1 red enchantment. If a red or artifact source you control would do damage to an opponent or permanent opponent controls, it does that much damage +1 instead. This is one where there's a lot of potential. Like, we don't know exactly what it's doing. If you're familiar with Ghirapur Aether Grid, it's 2 colorless and a red, and then is an enchantment that says tap 2 untapped artifacts, deal 1 damage to to any target. I've been brewing with that a bit in Pioneer. There's some potential for that kind of thing going on, but there's a bunch of other uses that you can have for this as well. Mishra, Excavation Prodigy. 2 in a red, legendary creature, 2/1 with haste. 1 tap, Rummage, discard a card, then draw a card, kind of the opposite of Urza. And then whenever you discard 1 or more artifact cards, add red. Once per turn, bear in mind, again, because Urza's Power Stone ability is once per turn, but the ability to kind of get a quick burst of mana, which you can also get straight away here, is quite powerful. And then discarding artifacts, as I mentioned before, is something that you might be in for a penny, in for a pound, whatever. Oh yeah, Monastery Swiftspear obviously is in Pioneer already, but it's a huge boon to Explorer. Probably the most important card in the set, but yeah, alright. Then we'd go for the throat. Obliterating Bolt, 4 damage to a creature or planeswalker. If it would die, exile instead. Just great removal. Yep. Over the Top's a fun one, I guess. 5 red, each player reveals the number of cards from the top of their library equals the number of non-permanents they control. Puts all permanent cards revealed this way onto the battlefield and puts the rest into the graveyard. I thought this would be a fun card to brew with. You might be able to do something crazy with it. I don't expect it to be a tier deck in either format. Tomical Scrapsmith, 2 and a red. Oh, right, okay, yeah. ETB mill 3 cards, put an artifact from among them into your hand. If you don't, it gets a counter. Again, mill effect, finds you an artifact, could be useful. Just, yeah. Visions of Phyrexia, 2 red enchantment. Beginning your upkeep, exile top card in your library. You may play that card this turn. At the beginning of your end step, if you didn't play a card from exile this turn, create a tapped Power Stone token. So bear in mind this is play, so you can play lands off the top of it. It's like an Outpost Siege rather than like Advances Blasting Cannons, or a Chandra. And then yeah, you get the Power Stone token off of it. We don't actually have Outpost Siege in Pioneer yet, but then this is kind of that with upside, and so maybe it's good enough. We'll see. Obviously, Outpost Siege also had the flexibility on it to play the other side to kind of grind your opponent out with damage if they were low life. But yeah, Visions is interesting. Mishra's Research Desk, which keeps looking like deck to me, especially because it almost looks like there's a dual disc there. But 1 mana artifact, 1 tap, sacrifice it. Exile the top 2 cards of your library, choose one of them. Until the end of the turn, you may play that card, and then you can unearth it for 1 and no red. Reusable card, it lets you look at the top 2 instead of the top 1. Obviously, there's a comparable artifact from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, which lets you look at the top, which exiles the top card and does it. This gives you a little bit of flexibility on when you actually use it. You can put into play and then activate it when you want to. It is more expensive, but the reuse is quite useful, and having a critical mass of those kind of effects can be really, really good. Scrapwork Mutt. 2 mana, 2/1 dog. ETB, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. And this is another one that I was talking about when it comes to Dredge, and that kind of shell you want to bring back cards, because you also have cards in your hand that you want to put in your graveyard and get rid of, along with wanting to bring cards back from your graveyard. There's also maybe potential for something like a Hollow One type shell, but it's a bit more of a stretch there. Okay, next up we have green. We're starting off with Branch with Prowler. Again, you guys must be getting bored of this by now, but 2 mana, ETB mill 3 cards, put a land card from among them into your hand. In Pioneer, we have State Wayfinder. In Explorer, we currently don't. Hey, this might get played. It's a one to be aware of. It's also an elemental, which does actually matter. Next up, Fauna Shaman. One of the more exciting reprints again. 1 green, 2/2 bear, Elf Shaman. Green tap's got a creature card, switch over for a creature card, reveal it up into your hand, then shuffle. Possibilities are endless. Obviously, we don't have Vegevine at the minute, but there's a bunch of other things you could potentially do. We'll see what exactly comes of this, but something certainly will be good. Okay, Gwenna, Eyes of Gaia. 2 green for an Elf Druid Scout. It's 2/3, legendary. But taps for 2 mana, any combination of colors, only to cast creatures and activate abilities of creatures or creature cards. Whenever you cast a creature spell with power 5 or greater, put a counter on her and untap her. Pretty powerful. Not in Elves itself. Elves isn't really taking advantage of the 5 power greater ability, and there are better 3 mana dorks between Circle of the Dream Druids and Marwyn. However, in some other kind of shell, we're doing things like, for example, with Lonely Adventure 3 mana 5/5, that kind of thing. Then maybe there's potential there. This is an interesting one. Obstinate Baloth. Get on Obstinate Baloth. Graveyard Trespasser, get in the bin, please. 2 green, ETB, gain 4 life. If a spell or ability opponent controls causes you to discard it, you can put it onto the battlefield instead. Similarly, they just reprinted Liliana. Joke's on you, ha ha ha. Obstinate Baloth of the format. Saren's Steelseeker. Oh, my voice. 1 green for a 1/2 human Artificer Scout. Whenever an artifact enters the battlefield of your control, look at the top card of your library. If it's a land card, you may reveal it, and put it into your hand. If you don't put it into the hand, you may put it into your graveyard. And this is basically a way to, if you have a way to loop an artifact, you can mill your entire library with Steelseeker, which is pretty powerful. Teething Wormlet, green 1/1 worm, Death Touch if you control 3 or more artifacts. Then whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you may gain 1 life. If this is the first time it's resolved, you get a counter as well. This is really a shout out to kind of Hardened Scales-esque decks that have artifacts. There's like a reasonable number of artifacts you want to play. Not 100% sure, but I think there's some promise there. Wasteful Harvest, the next one, just to quickly, mill 5 cards, put a permanent from among them, milled this way into your hand, whether that be a land, an artifact, a enchantment, a planeswalker, gets you one of whatever. After green, we've got multicolored. Starting off with Arbalest Engineers, 1 red green, 2/2 ETB, choose 1 of 3. Either deal damage to any target, put a counter on it, on target creature I should say, it gains trample and haste on a turn, or you make a Tower Stone. Maybe you want a Power Stone, maybe you want a 3/3 with trample and haste to attack, maybe you just want to shoot something. It's quite flexible. It's a human, it's got TMC3, you can play it off company. There's a potential here. Hajar Loyal Bodyguard. Red green for a 3/3, a Watchwolf body. Legendary creature, human soldier. Human again, like human and soldier, both relevant creature types, I suppose. Then you can sacrifice it to give legendary creatures you control +1/+0 and indestructible in a turn. Obviously, there are decks running around trying to abuse Bard class. Perfect candidate for that kind of thing. Next up, Harbin, Vanguard Aviator. White blue for a 3/2 legendary creature human soldier with flying. That's a lot of text already. Whenever you attack with 5 or more soldiers, creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain flying turn a turn. All of them. Note that it's not just the soldiers that gain flying, all your creatures. So already it's like a 2-mana 3/2 flyer. Pretty good. In humans, you can buff it, matters all the human matters effects, but lets you, when you go wide, lets you attack over the top, which is pretty good against something like mono green, where you can get stonewalled very easily after the first few turns. Obviously, some of the creatures have reach, but it gives your entire fleet +1/+1 and flying, and so lets you amass. You amass some creatures and then can kill them over the top. Pretty powerful, pretty powerful. Obviously, it's legendary. You can't play loads of them, but there it is. Legions to Ashes. Pretty straightforward. Exile target online permanent and opponent controls, and all tokens that player controls with the same name as that permanent. Finally, we've got a good answer to Kicker Jace, I suppose. Get a removal spell, sure. Third Path Iconoclast. Red-blue for a 2/1 human monk. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create a 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature token. So it makes 1/1 colorless soldiers. They obviously don't fly. It is any non-creature. So includes things like 0-mana artifacts, if you want to go off and kind of like Paradoxical Storm and make a bunch of tokens that way. It's pretty good by itself. Obviously lets you play 8 Pyromancers effectively. Pretty sick, pretty sick. One of the cards I'm most excited about, I think. Ooh, okay. Spicy. Takesia, Digsite Mentor. 1 and bank colors. Legendary creature, Human Artificer. Creature you control get Vigilance and tap, Surveil 1. And then 2 green, green, white, white, blue, blue. Exile from your graveyard. Return any number of target artifact cards with mana value 10 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Activate only as a sorcery. I'll be honest, I have no interest in casting the card. I do have an interest in exiling from the graveyard. Maybe there's some shenanigans there, where you put together that amount of mana and a million things and can exile it to reanimate. Or a number of artifacts. But yeah, I don't think it's like good at face value, or like the front side if you cast it. But if you put it into graveyard, like either through discarding it or through milling, and then use the ability, it seems pretty good. Urza, Prince of Krug, 2 white blue, legendary creature Human Artificer, 2/3 artifact creatures get +2/+2. We finally have our Tempered Steel. Woohoo! Take that, historic. And then 6 mana, create a token that's a copy of target artifact you control, except it's a 1/1. So I mostly like this as a way to top out an aggressive artifact deck. Either kind of like blue, white, and soul, that kind of thing. You get that Temper Steel effect. Kind of use it as the finisher. I don't really love the idea of playing it in a mid-range strategy to start copying things. But that's just me. There's a potential there. But I think it is quite good in that kind of as the top end of a blue-white artifact aggro deck. Yoshin Dissident. Green-white, 1/1 Human Artificer. Artifact into the battlefield control. Put a counter on a creature control. Simple, straightforward. It does stuff. Yeah. Maybe. Blade Core Serpent's an interesting one. X and 6. 5/4 Serpent. When it enters the battlefield, for each blue, set to cast it, draw a card. For each black, each opponent discards a card. And for each red, it gets +1/+0 and trample and haste. This is a great way to use infinite mana. This is a great way to use a lot of mana as well. You can make a big creature that can kill them. You can make a big creature with a bunch of value. Build your own mini ultimatum, whatever. It's pretty cool. Clay Champion. X and 4, 2/2 construct. And then it enters the battlefield with 3 +1/+1 counters for each green spent. And when it enters the battlefield, you can choose up to 2 other target creatures you control, and then for each white, you can put a counter on each of them. So straight up, it's green, get an 8/8. You can spread counters around, you can do all sorts. Pretty cool, very flexible. I've been spending a lot of time messing around with green-white scales, and pretty cool. That's all I gotta say. Levitating Statue is an interesting one. Obviously, in Pioneer, we have Myth Realized as a way to kind of alright, I'm casting it as a sorcery or non-creature spells. I can put counters on this, then animate it to kill them later. Levitating statue, just 2 mana, does fly when it's animated. 2 mana artifact, whenever you cast it on a creature spell, it gets a counter, and then you can pay 2 mana to have it become a construct artifact creature until end of turn. And then the flying obviously lets you be evasive when you go in for the kill or whatever. But hey, maybe you do something with this. Who knows? Next up, Liberator urges Battle Thopter. It's a 3 mana, 1/2 flash flyer, legendary Thopter creature. It looks hilarious. It almost looks like a chariot, actually. You can cast colorless spells and artifact spells that are flash. And then whenever you cast a spell, if the amount of mana spent to cast it is greater than its power, you can put a counter on it. It's starting at 1, and it gets bigger from there. It's an interesting one, definitely worth a shout out. It's a legendary artifact, which matters for some things. And yeah, the ability to flash your things in is pretty cool. Ooh, okay, so big potential like artifact reanimate target, Portal to Phyrexia. ETB, each opponent sacrifices 3 creatures. Pretty good, huh? And then at the beginning of your upkeep, put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. Be your opponent's, can be yours. Hey. Prime artifact reanimation target for something like Refurbish, or one of the other effects we kind of talked about. Reconstructed Thopter, 3 mana 2/1 flyer, another 2. Again, I've talked about it before, I'm not going to keep droning on. Well, I have kept droning on about it, but that kind of dredge thing. It's colorless, which matters, because normally that deck plays a bunch of colors. The mana base is a little wonky. But yeah. And also it flies, which makes you come over the top, and kind of combine that with a number of creeping chills, maybe a couple of hits from like Prize of Agam, that kind of thing. You can assemble a kill that way. Slagstone Refinery. Okay, I'm not exactly sure what's going on here, but maybe it does something. It's a 4 mana artifact, and then when it or another non-token artifact you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, or is put into exile from the battlefield, create a tapped Power Stone. You can make a bunch of Power Stones if you have a way to sacrifice your artifacts. It does stuff, and that stuff could be powerful. Oh, and we get to the... We get to the Con the Creators might get a banned kind of part of the set review. So the Stasis Coffin, 3 mana legendary artifacts, and you can pay 2 and exile it to then get protection from anything turning your turn. Obviously, Khan gets cards from outside the game, which means that once it's exiled, you can then get it back, I believe. But the ability to tutor this kind of effect is super powerful anyway, and it and that along with the next card. Is it the next card? Yeah, the Stone Brain. 2 mana artifact, 2 tap, exile it, choose a card name, search your opponent's graveyard, hand, and library for up to 4 cards of the name, and exile them. The player shuffles them, draws a card for each card, exile this way. Combo decks are meant to kind of beat up on these kind of like on decks that Khan gets played in, and this lets you just be able to tutor up an answer to that, and so is super powerful. Yeah, one in your Khan board, pretty sick. And again, you can get it back, I think. Theran Parasuit, equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each equipment, aura and equipment attached to it, and has Ward 2. Yeah, it's like a plating style kind of effect. The ward is nice, but obviously they can target the artifact. It is a 2 mana artifact that equips for 2, so it's a bit slow. But hey, maybe something comes of this. Okay, now we're into the lands. So Battlefield Forge, obviously along with Brushland, 2 great additions. Both like red, white, heroic, green, white, auras, green, white. Hex, Scales I've also been playing a bunch of. A Blast reprint is nice, but obviously already exists in the format. Demolition Field, kind of a fixed Field of Ruin for Commander, but also there are some decks that might want to play 8 copies of these. Not necessarily right this second, but potentially in the future, either when you're punishing your opponent for searching a library. Bear in mind, this is Field of Ruin is a forced search. This is optional, but there are things like Aether Mind Sensor in the format where you can quote-unquote get them. Ooh, another land, and this is kind of an unexpected one. Fortified Beachhead. As it enters the battlefield, you may reveal a soldier card from your hand, and then if you don't, it enters the battlefield taps. Taps are both white and blue with no downsides other than the reveal a soldier. And then 5 taps, soldiers you control get +1/+1 at the turn. I think they're really trying to push blue-white soldiers, if that wasn't already obvious. But yeah, it's basically a quote-unquote free land that also has this pump ability on it that taps for both colours. Pretty sick. I'll put more lands. Hall of Tagzin. It's a colorless land. It makes Power Stones. It filters mana. Okay, cool. The Shimmering Grotto style effect. The Llanowar Race is the other pain land that's missing. And we also have Mishra's Foundry. Animates for 2 mana to become a 2/2 Assembly Worker. You can attack. And then also you can use it to buff other Assembly Workers. It's not quite as get 'em as Mishra's Factory was. Obviously, because it only buffs attacking Assembly Workers. But yeah. I don't know if there's any other like great Assembly Workers to target, but it's fine as a 2 mana 2/2 land. Oh yeah. And Takashi's Dig Site. I mentioned before about right at the start about potentially like a Surveil deck and Surveil Matters cards. And this is just another way to activate it, but then also like, hey, there's colorless decks and stuff. Alright, so Mishra claimed, yeah, the meld cards are the last things to go over. Mishra claimed by Gix, 2 black, red, 3/5 legendary creature human, Phyrexian human artificer. Whenever you attack, each opponent loses X life and you gain X life for X the number of attacking creatures. If Mishra, claimed by Gix, and a creature named Phyrexian Dragon Engine are attacking, and you both own and control them, exile them and meld them into Mishra lost to Phyrexia. So very quickly, the Dragon Engine is a 3-mana 2/2 with double strike. Just, fine, artifact creature. Artifact creature Phyrexian Dragon. And when it's the battlefield from your graveyard, you can discard your hand if you do draw 3 cards. It has that unearth ability to enable this, and you can also bring it back and attack with it at the same turn. Gets haste when you unearth it. And then obviously it melds in, and they meld into Mishra Lost to Phyrexia. It's a 9/9, and then whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, choose 3. Either your opponent discards 2 cards, does 3 damage to any target, destroy an artifact or a planeswalker. Creatures you control gain menace and trample. Creatures you don't control get -1/-1, or create 2 Power Stone tokens. Yeah, it's pretty strong. If you're attacking with it, you probably won the game, I would say. So hey. The Titania Voice of Gaia. 1 green for a 3/4 legendary elemental with reach. Whenever 1 or more land cards are put into your graveyard from anywhere, you gain 2 life, kind of like Zero and Orbish. And bear in mind it's from anywhere, so if you mill them or whatever as well, that works. At the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 4 or more land cards in your graveyard, and you both own and control Titania and a land named Argos Sanctum of Nature, exile them and meld them into Titania Gaia Incarnate. So then the land, Sanctum, ETB tapped unless you control a legendary green creature. Taps for green, and you can pay 2 green to create a 2/2 bear creature token, which is like decent already. Okay, it's like bear production. You can make bears, but then you also mill 3 cards, which is quite powerful, and pretty useful. And then they meld together into Titania Gaia Incarnate. Vigilance, Reach, Trample, Haste. Power and toughness equals the number of lands you control, and then when she enters the battlefield, return all lands from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. And then 4 mana, put 4 cards on a land creature, on a target land you control, and becomes an elemental. You can animate your lands with haste. Cool. Even if they all enter the battlefield tapped. Card's cool. Doing all kinds of things. Also pretty excited to play the bear land with Elvish Reclaimant potentially. And lastly, Urza Planeswalker is melded from Urza Lord Protector and the Might Stone and Weakstone. So Urza Lord Protector, 1 white-blue, legendary creature human artificer. It's a 2/4 artifact and instants and sorceries. It costs 1 less to cast. And you can pay 7 mana if you own both it and the Might Stone and Weakstone. Exile and meld them into Urza Planeswalker. So pretty hard to pull off overall. I think it's just worth mentioning the cards. And Urza is, like, the front side is actually pretty good. The 3 mana 2/4, like, discounted stuff is cool. Lets you company for 3 mana. Never forget that. So the Might Stone and Weakstone, 5 mana legendary artifact, Power Stone, and does have the Power Stone type, which matters. Whenever the Might Stone and Weakstone enters the battlefield, choose 1, draw 2 cards, or give a creature -5/-5, and then it taps for colorless, kind of to represent that it's 2 Power Stones together. But the mana can't be spent on non-artifact spells, just like Power Stones. And then with Urza, meld together into Urza Planeswalker. Plus a 7 loyalty, activate loyalty abilities of Urza Planeswalker twice each turn rather than only once. Pretty cool. It comes in on 7, plus 2 artifact instant sorcery spells you cost this turn. Cost 2 less to cast, you gain 2 life. That's a plus 2. Plus 1 to draw 2 cards and discard a card. 0 to create 2 colorless soldier artifact creature tokens. -3 to exile target non-land permanent. Or -10 artifacts and planeswalkers you control gain indestructible turn at turn. Destroy all non-land permanents. Pretty powerful. If you ever get to flip it, you should, again, win the game. Pretty nuts. And that is the full Explorer/Pioneer set review. If there's a card you think I've missed, if there's a card you think I'm talking nonsense about, let me know in the comments. If you made it to after the video, please hit the like button, maybe subscribe to the channel. I do a bunch of Explorer stuff. I also do some Standard and Historic. I have done some Pioneer stuff IRL, with dead text and things. I do try and throw those in there, and I play a bunch of both formats. Yeah. So, yeah. Cheers for watching. Peace, soup. Have a good day. Sure.